personal views and opinions expressed by our podcast guests are their own and are not legal advice or official statements by their organizations. Hello, my name is Debbie Reynolds. They call me the Data Diva. This is the Data Diva Talks Privacy podcast, where we discuss data privacy issues with industry leaders around the world with information that businesses need to know now. I have on my show a very special guest from Seattle, Olivia Holder. She is Senior Privacy Counsel at GitHub. Welcome.
Thanks, Debbie. It's great to be here.
Well, I saw your profile on LinkedIn and I was like, oh, wow, we need to know each other. I don't know why we don't know each other already. I really like to talk to people. So let me back up. So my career, I've worked with people in like Fortune 500 companies for years and like tons of, GCs and people in-house. So to me, when I get a chance to talk with someone who's in-house at a tech company, it's just extra special. So I would just love to pick your brain. And as you said before we recorded, we can kind of geek out about privacy.
Sounds really fun.
Now tell me about your journey into privacy. What made you pivot that way, and what kind of caught your interest about it?
Sure, yeah. So I started out in law school with an interest in intellectual property. And after doing some graduate assistantship work in the area and some internships, I realized that I was more interested in technology generally and how legal issues affect technology. I did some work with a startup in an incubation program at Georgia Tech, and that was my first exposure to like the tech world, the business world, and in comparison to like a traditional legal environment, it's much more fast-paced, which was exciting to me. And then from there, I just kind of really fell into a privacy internship at an internet service provider, and that ultimately turned into a full-time role. That was about 6 years ago. And so I've just been in privacy ever since. It's just, like I mentioned, based on my interest in law and technology, privacy is just right at the intersection of that. And it's just a really interesting, fast-paced growing area.
Yeah, I think it's an exciting time to be in privacy right now. What is it that probably most surprised you, recently in the kind of recent years about kind of privacy and technology? I feel like people, I feel like privacy, especially kind of before the GDPR came out, there were just little groups of us like chatting amongst each other. No one really cared about it. And I feel like GDPR and some, a lot of the data breaches, now it's things that are in the news. It's just more out there. So, what are your thoughts about that?
So I think you're definitely right about just the explosion of privacy issues. I remember like starting out in my first role and working on kind of awareness presentations for leadership, and I would find real like the one privacy article that came out in the last few months, but now it's like every day there's something new. But at the same time, the sophistication of understanding of privacy concepts doesn't necessarily follow for people who aren't privacy professionals. And so I wouldn't say I'm surprised by recent changes, but I think some of the areas where I just see things exploding, for example, is in children's privacy law. So like the UK fairly recently introduced age-appropriate design guidance for online services directed at children, including those services which are mixed audiences. We have a lot of US state privacy laws cropping up around education privacy and children's privacy. So I think kind of helping to re-educate stakeholders on the basics as the basics change is one of the challenges. It's really important as a privacy professional to kind of help to keep everyone informed.
Yeah. Well, actually, so this is a topic I know a lot about, children's privacy. I obviously I'm kind of a geek about the stuff anyway, but I also have clients that develop tools that children use. So being, very looking at these laws, I think one of the interesting things about it is that, when you think of things like CCPA or, different privacy laws around the country in the US, some people, they're like, oh, well, this doesn't apply to me because I don't make this much money or whatever. It's like, well, if you have a kid that you share data with, yeah, it applies to you basically. Almost everything applies to you. So,
Yeah.
so you don't get out of jail free card because of that. So, it is a really sensitive issue. And I would love to talk, chat about this age appropriate design code in the UK. Because I think is a great guide, not just for the UK, but for anyone who's developing apps around for children. What are your thoughts?
I think it's or one of the core concepts, or really two core concepts out of that guidance that stick out to me is number one, that it's not meant to be an age gate for the internet. I think they described it as, but at the same time, where we have services directed at children, they're looking to make privacy the most private setting as the default. And I think that's a really interesting challenge for really any tech company that is offering a website that a person can access. Kind of like you said, a lot of times you'll work with clients or customers where they say, well, this doesn't apply to me for one reason or another, but like you said, actually, it does apply into a much wider user base. So I think that it's a really, it's a tricky position for really anybody like hosting a website that can be accessed globally. And even in addition to, I know we're focusing on children's privacy law right now, but another emerging area are these data localization requirements for international laws. Most recently, I've been looking into Russian privacy law, which not necessarily super new, but where similarly to these children's issues where you have the data localization requirements, it's like I was saying, kind of difficult where you have this world of technology where anyone can access websites from anywhere in the world.
I love that you're bringing this up. This is so interesting. So let's talk about data localization. So we know that countries, especially in Asia, have been doing data localization built into their laws and have for a very long time. But we're seeing that come up a lot more in a lot more jurisdictions. Like I know, for decades, India's had data localization related to financial stuff. And then, obviously, Korea, North and South
And
have,
China.
yeah,
Yep.
have a lot of things about data localization. What are your thoughts? Are you seeing that grow? Seems like we don't seem to be having the data localization conversation in the US, but definitely in other countries that comes up.
That's a really good point. And I don't know if it's saying the US is behind the times in that respect or not. When I think about data localization, I think about it's really this idea that privacy is being treated, or personal data is being treated like real estate or like a physical object, and that's not exactly a direct comparison. So I think that the sentiment behind it, countries wanting to have control over protecting their citizens' data, is definitely valid, but I just don't know how much data localization would actually achieves that goal. Especially when you think about some of the countries that do have those localization laws, it's often more of a like security or surveillance based motivation behind that. So maybe it's not so great for privacy at the end of the day for the actual people, and just allows those governments and people who govern those citizens more control over the data.
Yeah. Also, I think one facet, I agree with that, by the way. One facet of data localization that I've noticed is that they want to have people who are in that country have those jobs. So part of that is, okay, we want someone, and just like the PIPL law, they want, if you have a data privacy officer, or someone who understands where your data is and what they're doing, they want them in China. They don't want them in some other location. So I feel like part of that is, an economic driver as well, as in addition to kind of control.
That's a great point. Yeah, that's definitely another angle to that, is that motivation to bring more of the tech industry back to those countries, or maybe to those countries for like the first time potentially. But when I think about that as a motivation, I think like, yes, it is providing more jobs, but it's not like these companies are like headquartered and innovating in those locations. And what will motivate that, I think, will be different sorts of policy. Like I'm kind of like spitballing this, but like, for example, tax drivers for new businesses to incorporate in specific locations.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And, like we're seeing a lot of financial incentives in places like Singapore. So they want businesses to like use the cloud and, innovate and do stuff in tech. So they're giving people who have those skills, they're, trying to fund them and make sure that they can kind of have more of a groundswell of local talent in those areas.
Mhm.
Yeah. Let's talk about we were chatting a bit before the recording about apps. Okay, so since you're at GitHub, I had to ask about this. So
Definitely.
what we saw with COVID, so, and I think part of this is because of just the way the US is right now. So in other countries, countries that decided they wanted to develop an app, the country, it was a country level effort, right? And then people thought that the US will have a federal app or something, and that just never happened. So like every state had to create their own app, and a lot of states didn't create apps. I think probably one of the more popular ones, or the one that seems more robust at the moment, is New York. So with their Excelsior app, where they're kind of tracking people, they can like get a QR code to enter restaurants and different things. But the other thing that we saw with COVID is that we saw a lot of kind of non-governmental companies and developing apps for COVID, like contact tracing, or trying to do contact tracing, or just gathering information about individuals. So not necessarily not involved with the government, not involved with healthcare, but just these apps popped up. And what some places we're finding is that and this happens a lot, where you take code and you reuse it for some other purpose, it makes it have other code in there that you weren't thinking about that does different things. So there was an example of someone who did a COVID app, and it was previously like a pizza app or something. So it would literally be, you could order pizza, or it was just doing weird things in the background. So I think, from a privacy perspective, when people are creating apps, especially around kind of personally identifiable data, it's really important that the developers really look at that code, even if they want to repurpose some of it. You have to really look at what is actually doing, because maybe if it was a pizza app, no one cared, right? But if it's an app that is collecting personally identifiable information, and then also, I guess I'll throw in here kind of the FTC Act, where they just because a company is not covered by HIPAA doesn't mean that they don't have responsibilities for kind of personal health information.
Yeah, those are all really great points. I think, the developer space is super interesting to me. Obviously, I'm working at GitHub. When I was in my previous role at Microsoft, I was also supporting developer tools. And these are like a lot of times in product design, we talk about identifying edge cases and solving for those. And like this COVID app example that you gave, I mean, the edge cases are virtually endless. And when you think about, you know, a single developer potentially working on GitHub or elsewhere, we're just trying to do some good, might grab the pizza app code like you were describing. It's not necessarily the I don't want to say like the fault of the developer or the developer doing a bad job. More and more developers are really having to become privacy experts. And there's just not a lot of good guidance in that space yet. For example, some of the things that I have advised on, for example, publishing open source code or creating a new app, for example, when you're leveraging third-party code, sometimes it's extremely difficult to understand, number one, is the code that you're leveraging collecting telemetry? It probably is. And when I'm talking about telemetry, I'm talking about usage data that's coming back to the developer or the enterprise that built the app. And then number two, what exactly is that data? What are the specific events and what sort of information do they contain? That can also be really difficult to figure out. I remember a recent example of something that I worked on. They might not even have a privacy statement or a privacy policy. When you read that information, very often it's related to like a website terms of service rather than the code itself. So in this recent issue, I was actually working with one of the engineers who helped to build the project. And he kind of shared some way down in the weeds documentation that was like buried in this information with kind of line items of this is the specific event, that's what it's used for. And it can just get really tricky, especially where developers can use free text to define their own fields. They might repurpose a field, but unknowingly that could send, like in the COVID example, PII and clear text where it could be, where it's not really necessary to do that.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I think, especially, I know we talked about the COVID example, the COVID app example, but I think the thing that concerns me, and I don't know, I want to know your thoughts on it, is like people developing software that's used in IoT devices. So typically, IoT, to me, an IoT device is basically a computer without a screen. Basically. So if you're using a device, you don't really know what's happening or what's going on inside that device. And so, I think, because IoT and the metaverse is, getting all, this big play, that's going to be a huge issue going forward, especially because consumers don't necessarily know what to do. They don't know how to, we need help basically. So consumers definitely need help when they're using these tools. But what are your thoughts about that? Just IoT, Internet of Things, the metaverse in general.
Well, I really like the point that you made, which is consumers need help. A lot of time when you're talking about product design in technology and probably in other industries as well, you talk about creating the minimum viable product to get it out to customers. And there's this sentiment that, well, we'll put out this minimum viable product and then our customers will tell us what additional features they want or what should be changed. But when you're talking about privacy concerns, especially in IoT, consumers don't know what privacy settings are needed. The businesses barely know what privacy settings are needed. Earlier, I was talking about kind of those various edge case scenarios, thinking about IoT like voice activated devices. It's just little things that might not be caught that really probably require a lot of stakeholders working together to field through all of those issues. Things will definitely be missed, even if all of the best intentions are made. So thinking about the metaverse, I'm thinking about obviously like Facebook and the Meta, the change, the parent company Meta, and the recent announcement that they're deleting the facial recognition data from the Facebook technology. I recently read an article that was pointing out that the metaverse, the new avatar type area that they're focusing on, that area will still be leveraging all of these technologies and similar technologies. So it's kind of like transferring the privacy risk from one area to the other. And really all of those same problems are going to be present in a much more complicated space because it's so new.
Yeah, you make a great point. You make a great point. Yeah, the metaverse is going to make things just more complicated. And so I don't know. I don't know. My opinion is that I think Mark Zuckerberg is wrong for the right reasons about the metaverse. So yes, the metaverse will be big, but the metaverse, in my opinion, is going to be about the um, the devices that capture the data, that do the sensors, that do, that stuff. So that to me is what, because, people who, whether you want to be in the metaverse or not, we're like our big toes in the metaverse currently. So if you have a smart speaker, if you have a smartphone, if you have an AirTag, all that is, metaverse prep for the things that are coming next. So I think this is going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But, I guess I'm concerned because, when you look at all the news about the cyber breaches and stuff like that, people are still falling for these same old tricks. And I thought that we'd be at a better place right now than we are, So people are still falling for the give me your password trick. I'm like, I can't believe that people do that still. So going into a area of computing that's going to be a lot more complicated concerns me greatly.
Yeah, I personally, and I can't even say that I don't use them, but I personally try to minimize my use of IoT. Like I'm attached to Google Maps, but as far as like voice activated type controls, I don't use those. And for similar reasons that you're describing, I think that the the intent to create good and useful tools uh, is a beneficial and not obviously not necessarily a bad thing. Um, but it really takes a lot of effort to thoroughly analyze these areas and come up with a good approach. And I think that's just not really how the world works. The tech world is trying to kind of like push out new products and services as fast as we can.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So were you shocked when the news came that Facebook was going to delete these images?
It was surprising, but I think it was definitely a good move. Earlier, we were talking about some of the children's legal issues,
Mhm.
and I mean, children especially, but other areas where opt-in consent is required. Yes, I think Facebook mentioned in the blog post that they have had opt-in consent for this data usage since 2019. But at the same time, actually being able to obtain truly informed consent is very difficult. And so I think they, reduced a lot of legal risk and did a good thing by making that decision.
Yeah. Well, the thing that interests me, so I've been watching that case play out over years, right? So I literally thought so many times it was going to settle. So the fact that it went kind of all the way shocked me. But I think because Facebook is taking this move to delete those images, it makes me wonder what's going to happen with these Clearview AI cases that are going on, the data scraping cases, because I mean, this is a similar issue,
Uh,
basically.
I think that the data scraping in general is a really interesting issue. For example, with services like GitHub, where we're trying to incentivize open source developers, collaboration, products and projects, and companies that have similar types of goals, that's paired with something called an API, application protocol interface, where developers can query information that's held in these services. And that's part of the Facebook Cambridge Analytica issue. They do have policies for their APIs, and developers were able to bypass those policies because it was kind of more words on a page as opposed to having actual technical controls over such usage. And so I think moving forward, companies are going to have more of a responsibility to make sure that API usage is appropriate.
Right. Yeah. Because we're in so much of the future is about trying to create some level of interoperability. So kind of the open source movement is very important there. And so APIs will play like a huge role because companies, I think in the past it was like, okay, well, let's use this new process or this new tool. And you basically grab all the data you have and put it into this new bucket. So being able to say, okay, let's keep the data where it is, but let's create these connectors so that we can kind of share and have data traverse all these different areas.
Yeah, it reminds me of a book that I read last year by Shoshana Zuboff. I'm not sure if you have taken a look at it, but it's called Surveillance Capitalism. And it talks about how if it's free, you are the product is a bit of a misnomer. Really, humans are the means of production, and the product is these huge markets of scale built off of our usage data that are being traded from company to company where consumers might not be aware. And I think that kind of appropriately controlling things like API usage will help to limit those types of like dark patterns, essentially.
Yeah. What do you see that's coming up in the future that concerns you most about privacy?
That's a good question. Um, I think that what concerns me most is that privacy controls will not be able to keep pace with emerging technologies. And I think that it takes for an organization to do a good job at privacy, it takes investing in privacy professionals in the business, building and scaling privacy teams, not just in the legal department, not just in the technology or product department, but kind of in all areas. And that takes work. It takes, privacy professionals, legal professionals, convincing CEOs to make those investments. And I hope that can be done quickly enough to keep pace with some of these emerging problems. When you think about laws that are coming out today around things like responsible AI or some of the emerging privacy laws we've been talking about, they aren't contemplating a lot of the things we've discussed today, like what telemetry data is being collected by developers building apps necessarily. They're not thinking about those specific use cases. So it's really important for entities not to be treating privacy as simply a matter of compliance and, oh, we can reference this case and we know that this is the clear black and white line to where our behavior needs to sit. It's more important as an ethical obligation for entities to do well at privacy. And so it just concerns me that that might not be happening everywhere.
Right. Yeah. I think I had a gentleman, very smart. I like him so much, Chris Roberts on my show. And, he made a good point that especially when we're moving into areas of sort of AI and the metaverse and the kind of all this new data being collected, the harm can be astronomical, and there isn't a kind of an adequate redress for that. So, in some ways, you don't get a digital do-over. Like if someone, like let's say it's a facial recognition technology mistakes you for a criminal or something, maybe you'll get out of jail, maybe you won't. I don't know. So I think looking at how this data is being collected and how it's being used is really important. And I think trying to prevent the harm and understanding that privacy has to be kind of a proactive thing. And as you said, you made a great point. There will not be precedent for things that will happen in the future. So it's not like you can look back at the past because the future is not going to be like the past.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And kind of like I was saying earlier, it takes a lot of, I think it takes stakeholders from a lot of different backgrounds to actually achieve good ends in this space. Like earlier, I mentioned an engineer that showed me some documentation that was buried in technical guidance in order to figure out what data collection was occurring at that time. It it takes the privacy experts, but pairing with the industry area experts or the product area experts to actually be able to identify these cases where a violation might be occurring.
I would love to talk to you about, well, maybe two things. We'll see how you want to answer this. But I'm always interested in how privacy professionals who are in executive roles, what are your tricks of the trade to get that buy-in from different stakeholders, different levels, different jobs within the organization? And then how have you been successful in getting the investment buy-in from your organization?
Sure. I really like that question. A lot of times I think privacy discussions turn it like focus on the problems rather than the solutions. So I think this is a good opportunity to talk. A couple of things that I like to bring up is number one, just continuously socializing that idea that we're not just talking about personally identifiable information. We are talking about personal data, which is a very wide set of content. And that kind of goes back to increasing training and awareness regularly as things change. Another concept that I like to socialize is data minimization, from the perspective of it being valuable, not just for privacy. A lot of times when I get into data minimization discussions, I am sure that you have heard the same things. Like, we just want all the data right now. We don't really know why, but we'll figure it out later. I often like to come back and say, well, don't you want to be efficient with your data collection? Why do you want a bunch of data that might not be useful, wasting space? And that tends to go over well. A lot of times things like that can help you tack on to other efforts that are going on in the business. There's always some sort of cost reduction effort going on in a business. And if it's focused on something like data storage, you can kind of lean on those other areas of the business as leverage for doing the right thing for privacy. Another great hook, obviously, is leveraging security organizations in the business. Generally, the goals are, if not similar, definitely overlapping. So definitely like to grab those other stakeholders to build the case. Another thing that I like to focus on is uh, draw away a little bit from the privacy um, jargon and just take it from the customer perspective or client perspective or whoever the end user or customer is, to say we want to be transparent about what we're doing. We have to put them on notice and get consent for that usage and just kind of start from that perspective.
Wow, you dropped some knowledge on us today. That's serious executive talk. That's really important because I think a lot of people, some people that I know within the privacy area, they get frustrated because they're like, well, why, I want the company to do this because it's the right thing to do, but you have to have it make sense within the business framework as well, right? So hearts and minds will only go so far. Like you have to put some numbers to it. You have to find a way to make it make sense for that person to be able to kind of sign on and advocate for that.
Yeah, earlier we were talking about kind of privacy in the news and how it's in the news a lot more. I think that's also always a great hook because you have an example, look what happened to Facebook. We don't want to go in that direction. Also, of course, having examples of monetary settlements or fines to bolster arguments is good, but that does kind of go back to another discussion we were having where privacy really does go beyond compliance because we don't have the clear cut yes, no. We're often in the gray space. And so it's important to instill in executives and stakeholders the idea that we are responsible and have an ethical obligation to do things right. For example, when we're talking about the developer space, helping those developers who are using tools and functionality to do it in the right way.
I work a lot with developers as well. I advise companies that are working on emerging technologies. I do a lot of that. And I think the thing that I don't know if it surprises me, but the thing that happens a lot is that when I work with developers, they're incredibly passionate about what they do. They're really excited about what they've done. And then if there's something they're developing that kind of crosses that line, and you say, well, we really can't do that, so it kind of takes the wind out of their sails. But it's not a knock on the person, right? They're trying to do their best job and they want to impress people, but having those conversations early on, not only are they good to have, they're vital to have because what I've seen is companies come up with barriers to adoption. So it's like, okay, we have this cool tool, it does all this stuff. And then when the privacy folks look at it, and it's a hard stop at that point. So having those discussions early is really important.
Yeah, definitely. I'm actually working on a privacy by design policy right now and been reading a little more into that in the Jason Crump's strategic privacy by design book. Something that really stuck out to me there was the idea that privacy is not a trade-off in like business value or functionality, and that's a big hurdle to overcome. And so, like you're saying, getting privacy involved early on can kind of help to steer that design in the right direction. But it can take a lot of convincing.
Yeah, that it definitely does, and it never stops. That's for sure. So I don't know. I for many years I had a Google alert for privacy, and before the GDPR came out, nothing. Like there was not a article that came out. Even once the law passed in 2016, it was very little. It was like a little trickle of everything. So now every day, there are like 8 or 9 articles about privacy that come out. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely become a buzzword, and that's um, it helps us out as privacy professionals to have a lot of practical examples of where things need to change.
Yeah. what are your thoughts about uh legislation? So you see what's happening in the US where all different states are, doing kind of their own thing, even cities, right? So certain cities, for example, have banned like things like facial recognition, and then we're seeing kind of the state level laws coming about, and people are, always frustrated about not having kind of a federal level, consumer privacy law, in a way like uh, the EU has, or how China has it, or even Australia, places like that. What are your thoughts about what will be happening? So your crystal ball in the future for legislation in the US, either on federal or state level.
I mean, in the future, there will be a federal privacy law that covers I would say, hopefully not just consumers, but really US citizens, period. So, like, not just in the context of a business doing things, but really in any entity doing things with personal data. I think it's one of the few fairly bipartisan issues right now. So we have, like, outlook is good for something happening in the near future, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's something that takes 5 years, 10 years to actually come to fruition. I know in the state of Washington, where I am, there was a lot of tension between including facial recognition technology in bills and being able to take facial recognition out of the picture and pause on that usage. Like you were saying, some cities are blocking usage of facial recognition as well, is a good place to start, because there are some core principles that are emerging from, whether it's GDPR, we see some of it in CCPA, although it is more consumer focused, that would be, dare I say, fairly simple to get set on the federal level.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. We could probably have a whole session just talking about this. The sticking points seem to be private right of action, right? Business don't really want that, and then preemption, which states don't want. So the states want to be able to have these laws and not have them preempted by something federal, and then the private right of action. So to me, I would almost not, at least for a first try, right? If we were, let's say we're gonna, as you know, it takes years and years and years to like develop, comprehensive legislation like that. So it's not gonna be like a Hail Mary or, something that just happens in a snap. But to be able to agree on just definitions of things, let's agree on a federal level what is personal data, what is sensitive data. Is different from state to state, and it's hard to even describe it because like for example, the New York Shield Act, they don't call it sensitive data. They have like tiers of data, right? And then it's just very confusing. So being able to harmonize on that, to me, would be like a huge win, I think.
That's a really great point. Kind of starting narrowly would be beneficial. You mentioned two things, preemption, and what was the second one?
Private right of action.
Private right of action. That was what I wanted to chat about a little bit. I think that that's a really interesting problem space, especially when you talk about like actual harm versus potential harm. And I just think about like some letters I've received in the mail, like, oh, you can be part of class action for whether it's like Equifax or a data breach that one of my old healthcare providers had. And at the end of the day, it's like, you can receive $3 if you fill out this form. And I think it's good that there is some sort of remedy, but the remedies that are available in these kind of scenarios don't really transfer much value back to the people whose privacy was harmed, except for that it probably won't happen in the future in such an egregious way from the company that did have their consent decree put in place, or settle for a large amount of money, or whatever the scenario ends up being. So I would love, I don't know what the right solution is, but I would love to see a better model for recourse for peoples whose privacy are injured. The preemption thing, I definitely understand where you're coming from there, but I think a great approach would be to have a federal law and enable states to enact stricter laws if they want to.
Yeah, that's basically what the EU has with GDPR. So obviously the GDPR covers all of the EU member states, but those states also have their own laws that may, have special things in them. So to me, I think that's kind of a hurdle. We just need to think about it in a different way, because I think that's, states in the US have their own type of sovereignty. So they should still be able to do things that make sense for their state, and not have it be a situation where you're kind of wiping out everything the states are doing. But I think the big concern is that the movement in the US on privacy legislation is happening really rapidly on the state level. And so at some point, it's like going to be so out of hand, it's just like going to be hardly any way to harmonize, I think.
Yeah, I love your idea of what if we could all just agree on what is the definition of personal data. It would be a great start.
Yeah, I think, oh my God, we totally need to do that. We totally need to do that. So if it were the world according to Olivia, and we did everything that you said, what would be your wish for privacy, whether it be, law, technology, human stuff?
I would just say opt-in consent. And by opt-in consent, I just mean in, whatever industry it is, whether it's you using a technology product or going to your doctor's office and filling out your paperwork, that entities really do provide whoever that client and user customer is a fully informed set of data about what they're actually going to collect and why, and give meaningful choice to that person to opt in or out of such usage.
Yeah, that sounds so simple. Why can't we do that, Olivia?
It's a lofty goal. And, a lot of the times, I don't, like I gave the doctor's office example, you really do have to provide that information to get seen by a doctor and get good treatment. So there's kind of this issue of what is actually required versus desired, and then what downstream usage is appropriate. I think it's just a lot of moving parts, and like a lot of what we talked about today, when we have emerging technologies that let you literally live inside of a virtual world, we just haven't foreseen all of the problems. I mean, really, you can look towards like science fiction, Minority Report, things like that, to see where things might be going and try to stop it.
Yeah, I love technology, and I love to talk about the future. And it's interesting to me that almost all movies about kind of this area, like technology and stuff, like they're all like dystopian. They're all like really about the scary things that are going to happen. So it's like the evil robot movie. It always comes out. So I don't know, maybe someone will make a positive movie about the future.
That's a great point. Yeah, it's easy to just kind of focus on the negatives that could come out of these kinds of privacy issues. But at the same time, like I mentioned earlier, using Google Maps to get somewhere you haven't been before, or, being able to order your groceries on Instacart, things like that, just make life a lot easier, and it is an improvement. Yeah.
I agree with that. Well, thank you so much, Olivia. It was so much fun to chat with you about all these, all these issues, and I'm sure we'll chat more in the future.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, Debbie.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.